Welcome to the Deep Light podcast from Park City's Presbyterian Church. This is a space for community, healing, hope, and education around topics of rescue and growth. Our prayer for this series is that it illuminates a deeper understanding of struggles within and around us, as well as God's profound love and redemptive light in Jesus Christ.
Hi, my name is Mark Davis. I serve as one of the pastors of Park City's Presbyterian Church. I want to welcome you again to another episode of Deep Light. We're in the middle of a series now on parenting, and we're going to be taking on all sorts of topics that I think are really important for all different stages of parenting. So if you're here today for this particular topic, there's others as well. Also, we always want to let you know that we delight so much in holding out Jesus Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life. And if there's anything that you're going through where you need encouragement or you have questions about the Christian faith, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are eager to listen and to offer hope any way we can. Today, I am very excited to welcome Mary Flo Ridley and Michelson to be a part of this episode. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves and even the topic that we're talking about. Some of you already know what it is because you know what they do. Others of you maybe just came across it and thought, ooh, this sounds kind of interesting. I do want to let you know that if you're listening to this in your car and your little ones are around, that some of the things we talk about, you may want to wait to talk about them with them later. So maybe your earbuds should go in now. That's totally up to you. But welcome. I'm so grateful for the two of you being here. And Mary Flo, I'll let you start. Introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about this whole thing that you started.
Well, first of all, thank you, Mark, for inviting us to be with you. We're so excited. We love Deep Life, and so we're excited to be a part of it. Well, my name is Mary Flo Ridley, and the birds and the bees is the topic that I'm very passionate about. Mm-hmm. And the birds and the bees is really a way to talk to your children about sex that instead of getting yourself prepared for one conversation, an awkward conversation at an awkward age, instead it's taking that topic and breaking it down into simple conversations. So it's a new way to talk to your kids about sex. It's different, but we feel like it's more effective. Mm-hmm. And as believers, we really believe we have a beautiful story to tell. And the Lord in His Word brings it up in Genesis. So we feel like we can, at the beginning of our family, establish the message we have for our family on this topic, and we can have lots of little conversations. So when you say at different stages that Deep Life is covering for parents, this is really can be in a lot of different stages. But we like to start out when they're really young and start to talk about the beauty of God's design in different ways.
So I have 5 children and one who's pregnant with our first grandchild, which will come in August of 2022. Did you know that? I know. I've looked like a grandpa already for a long time, but I don't have a name yet. I'm working on that. But so we had to have that awkward conversation and probably waited until an awkward age until we really began to come across the materials that you all created, which we're so grateful for. So I know we'll enter into that in a little bit. Megan, you were a student in the youth ministry when I first got here, which is so fun to see.
I know. I think we met on the Florida trip.
We did. Oh. And now you have your own family, et cetera. And then you've been involved with this Birds and Bees for how long?
7 years ago.
Wow.
We had a divine conversation. Uh-huh. I know that because I was pregnant with my second, and he just turned 7 last week. So the Lord really put this message on my heart in the same way He put it on Mary Flo's and brought us together. And we had a conversation of, I think, it was with one of her daughters who was kind of like, my mom kind of, is thinking of stepping back a little bit, but I don't want to do this. And neither does my sister. And I was like, well, I might want to. And at the time, we were living out of the country, actually, so I had no business even saying that. Uh-huh. But then I was like, well, I'll talk to Mary Flo before we go back.
And you had heard me speak when you were
I was teaching middle school before I had kids, and so I heard Mary Flo speak in 2009 as a newlywed teacher, and I was teaching middle school, and I was just hearing it through the lenses of middle school students who I thought were living in a very sexualized culture. So I was thinking, but I left just blown away. And looking back, it was the Lord's, the first time He kind of put her message on my heart, and kind of lit a fire that was brewing already of we have got to handle this in a better way. And then I heard Mary Flo, and I was like, oh my goodness, every parent has got to start talking to their kids like this. Middle school could be so different. Marriages could be so different. We have got to talk about this in such a different way. And then slowly over the years, had kids of my own. I was having my second kid. We came back. I ran into Jill. We had this off-chance conversation, and then lo and behold, I'm in Mary Flo's living room, very pregnant with my second child, and it was a moment. I mean, we both were like,
I think
this is right. And she's like, I've been praying for someone for so many years. And I was like, this is exactly what I'm supposed to do. And she's like, I think so. I was like, I think so too.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about the beginning. So how you guys got started together is sweet, because it was a burden that you had and felt as a middle school teacher, beginning to see a culture that's really not trending in a good direction. So many ideas and thoughts being constantly presented. But I know something of the story because of what we shared not too long ago, Mary Flo, about how it got started. And I think it'd be really interesting just for a few minutes to talk about the burden you felt even in getting this thing launched.
Well, I grew up in a family, I'll go all the way back there, where the word sex was never said. A wonderful family, lovely family. We talked about everything, but we did not talk about this topic. But there was nothing in the culture that was saying anything against. In the early 60s, I guess they were saying it other places, but in El Paso, Texas, there was really not any cultural influence that was different from what my parents would have said.
Yeah.
So there wasn't that challenge. But anyway, I grew up in a family where there was no conversation. And then when I had my own children, I was curious when my firstborn asked me, Mommy, how is that baby coming out of you about our secondborn? And I thought, I would love to tell you, but I don't know if I can. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do this. Should I do this? May I do this? And
that was real, wasn't it?
That was very real.
Because I think that's, when you talk about the awkward, that's what people feel is like, should I? When should I? What if I do it wrong? What if I scar them?
Yes.
What if I say too much?
I don't really want to institutionalize my children because I told them at such a young age. And,
yeah.
and having never heard that kind of conversation, I didn't know exactly how much I could tell. And so that was kind of my first step. And then I was introduced, and then I was a volunteer with the Dallas Junior League. And in that role, I was a trainer. And 1 year, in the process of deciding what class you were going to teach that year, they pulled out a little wadded piece of paper that said, would someone teach us how to talk to our kids about sex? And in my mind, I thought, I will never do that. That would never be me. I can't even answer one question for my child, and my parents never talked to me. But our chairman said, I think you should take this, Mary Flo. And I said, oh, no, I can't even tell you how many reasons why I shouldn't. And she said, well, we'll send you to Washington, D.C., and you'll get trained. And all I heard after she said, we'll send you to Washington, D.C., was room service. I had a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I thought, trip. Oh, my goodness, there's travel involved?
Yeah. So, I can go.
I'll go. So I went, and the conference was very much, very worldly. It was basically the underlying proposition was that your kids are going to be sexually active at an early age. Get over it. Here's how we propose safe sex. Here's how we, here's the situation.
Were you prepared for that to be kind of the overwhelming message as you went, or was it really kind of shocking?
It was shocking to me. I even had the courage to raise my hand, and because they had just gone through all of the psychological and physiological damage that happens from what they called an early sexual debut. That's how they put it. And I raised my hand and I said, well, what if you want to talk to your kids about waiting until marriage? And there was this silence, and then laughter. It's like, who is this? And I wasn't prepared. No, I was not prepared. But I was kind of mad about that. And so when I came home, I was determined to figure out a different way. And I went to the Junior League and I said, okay, I owe you a workshop, but I'm not going to give you the workshop I was trained under. I can't do that. But if you'll give me 6 months, I want to come up with something different. And so that's when I did research. I talked to pediatricians, I talked to church counselors, I talked to school counselors, I talked to early elementary teachers, and then I looked in the Bible. And so that was how this was. That was the formation of the steps, the order of the steps, and I thought I would really only give that talk once for the Junior League, but then organically it grew.
Ha ha ha!
So
tricks on me.
So you, even as you were doing it, you didn't have a vision of, okay, this is something I'm going to begin to lead and speak and write all this.
No.
So when did that happen after you gave your?
Well, I
workshop?
did it by myself for 18 years, just word of mouth, will you come to our MOPS? Will you come to our school? And through that kind of process, I think I heard almost every question, because I would have a Q&A, and I would go back and research and think. So it was a learning process. It was sort of my graduate school. And then for 12 years, I started doing this in 1986. So for 18 years, I did it by myself. And then for 12 years, I was associated with a nonprofit who said, we'll promote you as a speaker. And then after that, Megan came along, and we completely changed the format for how we were going to handle. We formed a little company, and we videotaped it, and so we still do live speaking, but this videotape allows this information to get to parents in a wider circle.
Okay. So Megan, Mary Flo's burden starts with just kind of, somebody needs to do this. We think it's you. Tell us about your burden. You talked a little bit about it already as a middle school teacher, but what was the burden that led you to, I really want to be engaged with this. I want to understand what Mary Flo is doing and then see how this might work.
I think it's just, we've talked about this for so many years, but I think this story, or our story, Birds and Bees story, is just such a cool testament of God. I think we both are like, I can't believe we get to do this. And I know some people are like, I would rather die than do this as a living, but we love it, and I can't believe I get to do this. So I think we just, or I personally, and I know you feel the same, but just like an instrument in his hand. Like I felt like he just put on my heart, I feel like, in that season of my life as a newlywed, all my friends were getting married, I was with all these middle school students, and it just felt like in so many seasons, it was like, why are we the church? But I felt very frustrated with the Christian message of sex. And
what about it?
That it was not, I felt like they weren't speaking clearly. I felt like they were speaking in a confusing way of the message coming from the Christian evangelical world was just wait. And that was kind of it. And I felt like it wasn't helpful to elevate it in this way, that this is this God-given gift, but we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to help you, but just wait. Yeah. Or just wait, or just wait. Those are like the two versions of it, And then it's kind of like, well, why are we talking about this? And I like to talk about things, so that was frustrating to me. Why isn't anyone talking about this? Or as a middle school teacher, like, for example, we had this incident where there was like a sexting incident, and, teachers meeting and principals, we're all hubbub, whatever, and then they send the student home, and like that was kind of it. And I was kind of like, why aren't we talking about this? Like, I want a round table. I want the boys here, I want the girls here, I want the parents here, and like, why aren't we talking about this? And so it was like this accumulation of frustration of like, why isn't anyone talking about this? Or in college ministries, why aren't you talking about why you should wait? Or what it's like when you don't wait? Or what are some of the risks? It was just frustrating to me that nobody was talking. And then to hear Mary Flo, I left as a teacher, I was taking so many notes, and I wasn't even a parent yet, and I was just like, oh my goodness, this is so rich. And then I heard her again here at the church when I had a baby. So I think Mary Margaret was only 6 months old, and I took rigorous notes, and I'm writing everything down. And then I go home and just word vomit everything to Blake, who's like, "You want me to say the word vagina for our baby?" Like, okay, I was like, "You don't get it. You don't even get it." But I was just on fire. I was like, "You've got to hear this." And then we joked.
I would love to have seen that conversation. Just
sweet Blake.
I was just like, "Oh, like," and then she said this, and then this, and he's kind of like, oh, okay, like, freak. But I was on fire, and so then I go on this girls' trip. Like a week or two later, and it's like 3 of my best friends from college, and we all brought our firstborn babies. It's a whole other story, and it was a disaster in its own right. My dad was like, "This is the stupidest idea I've ever heard." I'm like, "Dad, it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun." And we get there like, "Why are we here? Our husbands aren't here. No one's here to help us. We all have our own." It was bad. Anyways, but on that trip, one night when all the babies were down, I made everybody sit down with their glass of wine, and I gave the speech. Because I said, "You guys have got to hear this. Sit down. I've got to tell you this." And so I brought my notes with me on the trip, and I just told them everything. And those girls still, to this day, are some of my sweetest and most supportive friends. Of like, when I told them, I think I'm going to work with Mary Flo, they're like, "Of course you are." Yeah. It's so ridiculous. So I think I just felt this burden of sharing, of like, this is so good. I've people have got to know about this. And I think that was on my heart more than anything, of just like, oh, Mary Flo, this can be so much bigger, and we could reach so many more people.
Right.
Come on, we got to tell everybody.
I love it.
And I needed that encouragement. Not that I didn't have encouragement. Dave's been so encouraging through the years. But sometimes when it isn't what you've got in your college degree, this is not what I studied to be. I don't have any credentials.
Right.
And I just needed the time and the space for it to grow organically, to give assurance. I didn't want to lead anyone astray. And then for Megan to come along, that was just so great. And I really think, and I said this the other night when we did this here at Park Cities Pres, I've heard Tim Keller say that one of the most attractive things about Christianity is the biblical view of sex. I say this to parents all the time. We have a beautiful story to tell. Why are we, to what Megan is saying, why aren't we sharing this? And so I do feel like for parents that are reticent and fearful, we have such a simple way for them to enter into these conversations that are not complicated and not sensual but they're very sound and biblical, to point to the beauty of his design, and then to talk about the broken, or the boundaries that protect that beauty and that cause that beauty to flourish, and then the brokenness outside of the boundaries where we can get in the weeds about what's going on. But then if you think of concentric circles and the beauty and the boundaries and the brokenness, and then finally, as a believer, but God in his mercy leads us back to the beauty. So I just think whether you come from a place of your own brokenness or you're dealing with brokenness with other people, we're all stained with that.
Yeah.
And we don't live in the garden, and we are deceived. And that's just a common denominator to any human in this realm. And so getting past that to see, yes, but what can I share with my children? How can I leave some of that behind and move forward with them so that they can see his intention? That's I think what gets me jazzed up. It's like we've got the blueprint. He didn't leave that a mystery. We've got the blueprint, and it's right there in the first couple of books.
So I love those circles. I love the way you describe it, particularly the beauty of God's design. In all of God's design has purpose and points to it. It's not meant to punish. It's meant to protect and preserve that which is beautiful. It's intended to be this way. That's why, as sinful creatures, we go outside the boundaries, we fall. And we have an enemy, and the enemy is constantly seeking to bring those messages of shame, and that often stay with us like a Sharpie marker on the brain. So we know people listening to this are going to come from a lot of perspectives. Some have had horrific brokenness sexually. It could be from abuse. It could be from pornography. It could be from sex outside of God's intention, all sorts of things. And we want you to know there's a place to discover that kindness of God, the love of God, the mercy of God, which is overwhelming, and which does lead back to that beauty that you talk about, even the union that we would then describe in Christ, which is so powerful, so much of the gospel. But parents now having their own stories, and now the responsibility of raising a child in a culture that is even way different than it was when you went to D.C. and had room service. It's changed so much. I mean, because of this, because of so many different things. Brian Chappell says sexual sin today is the common cold in the church. So we can't escape the reality of what's all around us. It wasn't that long ago you were a middle school teacher, but even from that point to now, so much has changed. So let's start with maybe this question. Why is it so awkward for parents? What is it that you all see as those things that just get in the way of parents feeling comfortable to talk about this incredible gift that God's given?
Most of it is fear of failing to do it well, and also in their mind, this is a one-time only. I can't tell you the lowered shoulders and less anxiety that parents have once they realize, I don't have to do it just once and do it perfectly.
It's not just the talk.
Yes.
It takes the pressure off.
Yeah.
And so once they hear these bite-sized conversations, they're like, well, I could say that. Well, I could say that. But in their mind, they have blown this up into just an impossible conversation to do well. So it's the fear of failing to do this. It's the fear of what will my children ask that I don't know about. Mm-hmm. What else, Megan? We see so many.
I think there's a lot of fear, and we talk about this a lot, but the fear of, let me say this right, knowledge gained is innocence lost.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And a fear of, if I start talking to my kids when they're young, which we encourage you to do, well, I just don't want to take away their innocence. Mm-hmm. I just don't want to ruin their innocence. And so I think there's a fear of that, a fear of starting to talk, and then there's a fear of, I don't know how to do this. Mm-hmm. I think there's just a discomfort. I think most people don't know how to talk about this. I think most people as parents don't. I think most people as adults. I think if we polled all the married people in our congregation, we would say, how comfortable are you having open conversations with your spouse about your sex life? Mm-hmm. I bet that isn't that many people. We're not here to talk about that today, so don't get your hopes up. But call it other people. We're going to stay in our lane.
We're going to stay in our lane.
It's just not something people are comfortable talking about. And so I think that is like the main factor that holds people up is fear that they're going to mess up, fear that they're going to ruin their child's innocence, or just complete discomfort and awkwardness of, I don't know what to say.
And I want to highlight that first thing. It was a revelation to us, mm-hmm. I think, even to be able to say to parents, there's a difference between innocence and ignorance.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
And so to keep your child ignorant of what God has to say about sex, the beauty of his design, to explain how that baby got in there, how's that baby getting out of there, is actually their protection, because otherwise they'll be hearing it from someone else.
And a lot sooner than their sophomore year of high school.
Yes.
Or even probably 8th grade, or maybe even 5th grade, right? Much sooner.
So much sooner. And so that for you to assume that you're taking away their innocence, when actually what you're doing is protecting their innocence, because they have a certain knowledge now from you that's an anchor for them.
That's trusted.
That's trusted. You have a loving God who created you. I'm going to tell you about that. You have an all-wise, all-knowing, almighty God who created you. Let me tell you about that. I think so much of it is just parents need the encouragement and to hear those kind of conversations. That's one reason why we do it, why we give these talks and have the videos rather than read this book. We want them to be able to hear what that sounds like. What does it sound like to have those conversations? And I think that gives them confidence.
That's really good, because it is. I think you play the video that you haven't even seen or made in your mind as you're thinking about talking to your children. And I know for Christina, as we looked at this, she was like, okay, this has got to start sooner than you thought, because Kara, our oldest, learned to read at a young age. The school she was attending is reading through the Bible. She reads some early parts in Genesis, and she, even as a 6-year-old, has some questions that led to these kind of topics, and even beyond, natural relations to unnatural relations.
Right.
And Christina's like, well, wait till your dad gets home. And so I got home, and they pointed to this verse. And I remember thinking, I didn't know you yet, really. I didn't know you were helping us in some ways, but I didn't know about the birds and bees. I knew about the birds and bees, just not the other birds and bees. So
you knew something.
That's true. Yes. I was like, what do I do? Yeah. I mean, at what point do we talk about this? And I realized I feel like it's awkward. I feel fear. And Satan loves fear. Fear paralyzes us, And so to give tools where people can actually hear what that sounds like, I think is really, really profound. Now, Megan, you talked about adults talking about this as well. This is kind of interesting. My very first Sunday.
This is not our area, so don't.
I know, it's not a question. It's just
but I want to hear the story.
My very first Sunday in this church was January of 2003, and Tim Tinsley was serving here as the senior associate pastor, was my boss. And he was the first pastor this church ever hired. He was the youth pastor, did an amazing job. He's now in heaven with the Lord. We love him so much. But he was teaching a class, a combined Sunday morning community class titled Sex as an Act of Worship. And it was 3 weeks long, I think, and the fellowship hall was packed.
I bet it was.
Side to side, front to back. And the very first illustration he used was he took a fishing pole pole and a line with a lure on it and just cast it into the audience. And I was like, wow. And so he started talking about temptation and how particularly sexual sin will grab you. And he's like, we need to be talking about this because this is something beautiful that God has given as a gift that's been robbed, it's been deceived, it's been destroyed. So anyway, there was an interest at least in that class.
There's an interest. And I think something that drives me is just the opposition of fear. Yeah. You know, I think Satan is so, he wins when everyone's afraid. And so I always have been motivated by that verse of, for God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but of power, love, and discipline. And especially as parents, we cannot be afraid of what everyone else is saying or doing. I mean, if that is just driving us as parents, then we might as well just wave that white flag and just say, okay, I quit, I can't do it. Yeah. And then at the same time, as a church, as believers, the world is setting or saying very clear messages about sex. They're sending very clear messages, very clear images over and over again. You know, so they are very loud. They're sending very loud messages to us as adults and to our children about sex. And the church is responding with not a lot.
Yeah. Not even just wait.
Not even just wait. Kind of like well, I don't know what to say. So. And so I think, we've got to do something.
Right.
And so that's where I love this message and this work so much because I feel like we give parents permission to say something. We give parents a plan. And ultimately, I think what brings us the most joy is we give parents confidence. And they can think, okay, I think I can do this. And to kind of echo what you said earlier about everyone's coming in from different places, we know there is so many wounds from sexual sin. But I think something that Mary Flo has said over the years that we just repeat all the time is for parents in these conversations, this is no longer about you and your past. It is about them and their future.
That's good.
And those are separate stories, and these are separate conversations, and they don't have to be in line. It can have nothing to do with your past. You know, yeah. So this is Christ redeems all things.
Yeah, that's actually a beautiful statement. So let's talk about some of the questions. A minute ago, I think, Mary Flo, you said, I think I've heard probably every question that could be asked. So what?
I'm sure that's not true, but I feel like
and I'm not going to try to find one that hasn't, but what are some of the most frequently asked questions, and maybe some of the questions that are the hardest that parents really seem to be struggling with the most?
Well, this is kind of funny, but considering our age category, one of the main questions we get is what we call the hands in the pants with young kids. You know, my children are touching themselves. What do I say about that? I don't want to shame them. I don't want to, but I don't want to ignore it. It's very hard to ignore. So we just address that. We have a podcast also, and we had a pediatrician come and talk to us, you know, about childhood body exploration. So we talk about that, and we just help parents know maybe a little bit easier how to handle that. But we also get questions about some of the simple things of, you know, when do we stop bathing with our children, or, you know, just some of the modesty questions. Those are some of the most frequent questions. But today, a lot of the questions have changed.
Questions.
Yeah, those are easy. Those are easy. But today, it's a lot of questions about one of the children in our class. We got their Christmas card, and now they're not the same name or the same gender. And this is a good friend of my daughter's. How do we approach this? Yeah. Or my grandchild has another my child has another grandparent who is homosexual. How do I deal with it? And so there are just a lot of family situations, and then there are. Even how do I talk to my adopted child? Do I need to explain in vitro? You know, there's a lot more science, a lot more culture, a lot of finessing that children are being exposed to, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but there's just exposure to a lot of different topics.
And it's so important that a child would feel free to come home and say, "Mom, Dad." And obviously there's going to be parents listening who are single parents, you know, and what is that dynamic like? And I always want to just encourage you, in Christ, you're going to be given everything you need to raise the child God's given you to raise. Oh, that's just, and repeating that over and over again, everything. And that might mean you don't know what to say, but you can go seek counsel from, you know, a ministry like this and be encouraged with the truth that you hear. But if a child doesn't feel like they can ask, they're either just going to wonder, or when they get old enough, maybe look it up themselves, or they're going to believe their classmate who might be in third grade, that this is what that means, right? And so building that relationship so your child's comfortable to talk about these things. What's your advice there? How do parents do that?
Talk about the field. I love that illustration.
Yeah. So ultimately what we want to create with these conversations we're having with our kids when they're young. So we want to start when they're young because we want to create a safe place. Mm-hmm. We want to be the safe place that our kids know they can go to with their questions.
Right.
And so ahead of my head, here it is. Okay, this vision of a wheat field, the really tall grass, okay? And you have a sweet little child over here, and you have mom and dad over here. And eventually you're going to have to plow a path between the two to have these conversations about sexual things. And typically we think, okay, well, I'm just going to stay in my little corner until 12 or 13, and then I'm going to go for it. Okay, well, that's very painful, as we've all discussed. And so what we want you to do, what we train you to do with birds and bees, is to start walking that path and start beating down that grass when they're really young. That is your penis. This is a vagina. This is how a baby comes out of a uterus. Back and forth with these little conversations.
If you see a bad picture.
Come and tell me. Screens are fun and have cute things, but they can also have some scary things. If you see a bad picture, not a bad person. Private parts are private. We don't ever touch somebody else's private parts. I mean, all these conversations that build and build and build and build. And so by the time we do get to those hormonally charged, I was going to say raged, but that sounds so negative.
Insane.
Those hormonal years. And again, I'm not here to think that it's going to be like just these awesome conversations with mom and dad at 14. But that path has already been established, and that grass has already been beaten down. And so we have, over the years, established this pattern of trust and communication and this kind of habit of, I have a curious question, I go to mom and dad. I can trust that they will give me accurate information. And we have an honest and open communication. Because what can happen so naturally, and even out of a parent's love and heart, they can say, Mom, where does the baby come from? We're not going to talk about this now. It's kind of like, oh, don't say that to her. Or like, that's a bad word. Mom, what does sex mean? Don't ever say that word in front of your brother. It's kind of like,
whoa, what
are we telling our kids? Okay, well, that's a bad word. And we do not talk about that in our house. And you better not ask me that again. And we have just shut down all communication. And so I think the hope with that illustration is that we start young so it can continue. I mean, we cannot expect to have open and honest communication within our home starting at 14 if nothing's been said before, and it goes both ways. The kids start to learn that they can come to mom and dad, and then the parents start to learn, I can say these things, and I feel more confident each time, and I feel like, okay, I didn't sweat this time, or I didn't fall over, or over the years we're both learning how to do this.
And you don't have to wait for them to ask too. A lot of times I think there was, for a long time when I was raising my children, don't say anything unless they ask. And if they ask, only answer what they've asked. Well, that is putting the child in charge of this whole topic.
Yeah.
And it makes the child dependent on discovering things to come and ask you about. And that we want to put parents in charge of this topic. And so what we want to do is to say, first of all, you decide what's the main idea behind your conversations. We call that our first step, which is the message. And so this is the main thing you want your child to learn about sex if they're growing up in your family. For us, it was that sex is a gift from God intended for marriage. So that's kind of that's where we're going. We have an offensive strategy, and that's where we're going with our conversations. And in doing that, you can go to them when you think, this would be a good time. Sweetheart, have you ever wondered exactly how that baby got out of Mrs. Owens? Because we took her food this week, and we got to hold the baby, but we've seen her grow. Have you ever wondered how that happened? So you're inviting them, and you're taking the initiative. You're showing the opposite of that other scenario where you shut it all down. You're opening it up to saying, these are good things to talk about, and I'd love to share that with you.
So how do you keep people from thinking, okay, it's not one talk. So how many talks is it? Is it 4 or is it 6? Because that's not your message.
That's not the message.
Right? So how do you keep people from thinking that? What do you encourage them? What's the framework you want their mind to be in as they think about this whole process, that continues to move forward?
Well, we tell them it's really if you will open it, really once I think you hear the foundational conversations that we suggest, then I think it does start to open up your mind to, okay, well, this is the situation. We do have a teacher that's pregnant at school, or we are adopting, our sister is adopting a child or something. So we can talk about that, and you start to see more opportunities come forward. And, okay, here's their baby book. Let's go back and look at it. Sometimes also parents need to be reminded that they can circle back. Like, I didn't really give very many details when I first told the birth story. I guess I blew it. Well, forget that.
Good luck.
My kids will never know. No, you can say, you asked me a really good question 3 years ago. And I've been thinking about how...
I think I have an answer.
Yeah, I think I don't think I give you the complete answer. Or now that you're older, or now that you're going to camp, or now that you're in fourth grade, I want you to know the full details. So let's go back. I don't even know how much you remember of what I told you, but I'm going to go back and explain the whole thing. Because we have so embedded in our minds, this is a one-time thing, even explaining conception, parents are tempted to just check it off. Okay, I did that. Well, if they're young, a couple of years later, you need to do it again. You need to, we do this in talking about the Lord. We don't say, I told you years ago that Jesus loves you. We sang a song about that. We know that as people, we need to hear layer upon layer upon layer. So that is the challenge. Like once they hear it, really our prayer and our hope is that they will start to see things in a new way and look for opportunities to talk to their kids.
And I love the way you're equipping people to do that, because it's not just content that you're hoping to deliver right and that your child hopefully will receive. It's really developing very good relational skills of listening, like, okay, here's an opportunity. And I love those examples. A neighbor or a friend, is pregnant. Have you ever wondered where, those kinds of questions, which actually can translate to a lot of other subjects as well. Just teaching you as a parent to be a good listener, paying attention to the opportunities that are in the moment to say, this is great. I also loved how you said there's things that have to be repeated. And the things that matter most have to be repeated. More color can be added. That foundation continue to be laid. I think that's really, really helpful.
And something we say all the time is that these are drip by drip by drip conversations. The old way of doing it is getting that huge pitcher of water and just dumping it all out at once and nothing's absorbed. And so just kind of giving parents that visual of their little brains are a sponge, and it's our job as parents and our privilege as parents to fill that little sponge with our voice and our values and drip, 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 because ultimately that's like the greatest protection for our kids, because they're going to hear voices and values of other people. But if we fill their sponge with our voice and our values, that's ultimately the greatest protection that they have. That they will hear other things, but it won't be absorbed as much because it's already full of our voice and our values. And I feel like that's a good motivator for parents too, to be like, okay, I can talk to my kids and I should talk to my kids, to start talking and keep talking.
So what would you say to someone who, let's say they've got maybe middle school children and they've never had the conversation. So even now they might be feeling like, okay, I failed.
It's too late.
It's too late. Yeah. So they'll get it somewhere and I got off the hook, or I just feel a lot of shame about that. Right. Like I wish I would have. How would you encourage a mom or a dad in this conversation?
Well, if they're still living with you, I would say you've really got a good chance. Like they're still there. They're waking up in your house. You're driving them around. You are with them. But I would own up to it a little bit. Our suggestion is that you talk to your kids or you approach your kids or your child and say, okay, this may be awkward right this minute. It's hard for me to say this, but there is a topic we have never covered well in this house. It has never been on the table for us to talk about sex. And I am responsible for that, and I apologize. But we're going to start. And we're not going to start tonight, so don't panic. No. I know, and they're gonna roll their eyes and say, forget it. But to say,
they won't say, I've been waiting for this conversation.
Thank you, Mother.
Thank you, Father.
You're such a good mom. Thank you, Dad. But what I would do is say, we are going to start. And within the next 6 to 8 months, I have several things that I want us to talk about. But we're not going to talk about it in one sitting. We're not going to talk about it all at once. And we're not even going to talk about it tonight, because I just want you to be aware that I know it has not been on the table. And the longer it goes, the more awkward it gets. But there's some things I want to know as your mom and your dad that I have covered with you. And then I would move forward and in just baby steps. I would also say these are better shoulder-to-shoulder conversations. So maybe on Tuesday nights, for the next 4 Tuesday nights, we're going to take a walk. You're not going to want to come. I get that. I may look over and you have your earpods in and you're not listening to me. But
which means I'm only going to talk louder, so you better take them out.
So, we're only going to go 3 blocks and back. Like just take a baby step. But kind of get a few things off your chest and then say, but you don't have to say anything. But the next time we do this, could you bring one question or one something? And then I would say, I hope you'll forgive me that I'm now bringing it up, because that means it sounds like I'm afraid or I don't trust you. But what I know is that this has been a deficiency in our family, and I can either ignore that or I can move towards it. And so I would be just a humble parent who kind of says, I know this is awkward, and the awkwardness has kept me from talking to you, but I need to overcome that. And then I would just try to space it out so that you don't just overwhelm them once again with so much information, and see if you can't make a turnaround.
I love that. I don't think I've ever asked a question like that, and I think that's so helpful because I know what it's like to in my own parenting be like, I didn't do a very good job with that, and we have a spread. We have a 25-year-old all the way down to a 12-year-old, and it just there's things I'm doing now that I wish I would have done then, and probably
we're all doing our best.
Yeah. And the other thing I'd add to that though is, you can't expect, we made fun of this a minute ago, you can't expect them not to think this is awkward and uncomfortable. But that's where parenting becomes, a dependence upon the Lord. You're like, God, you're calling me to do this, give me the strength to do this, the perseverance to do this. And don't expect your child to be like, I can't wait for that walk. Only 3 blocks? Why does it have to be shoulder to shoulder? I would like to lean in.
Is it Tuesday yet?
Yeah, is it Tuesday yet? Oh, Tuesday night, taco night.
Yeah.
Oh, it's different.
Woohoo, walks with mom. Right.
Yeah. So I do think that's extremely helpful though. And I don't know if it's easier for men to talk about this or moms to talk about this, but it really needs to be something that parents are doing together. And even if parents are separated, but there's a good relationship, I mean, this is a part that both fathers and mothers need to play. True?
Absolutely.
Anything you would add to that in regards to?
I would say there's not, ideally, this is something both parents can weigh in on. I think naturally there's going to be a parent who takes a lead with each child based on availability or personalities or connection with the child. So we're quick to always say it doesn't have to be father son, mother daughter, because so many homes are so different.
In some cases, dad's not around or mom's not around for whatever reason, and that individual could think, well, I'm a single father. Mother's not able to be in the picture, so I've got to find somebody to talk to her about this.
Right, and that's not true. I think, so something that we do say, though, if there are 2 parents in the home, for a parent who is taking the lead on some of these conversations, to kind of loop in the other parent, so, hey, so-and-so and I had a great conversation today about where babies came from. You might want to just let them know that you're kind of looped in. So then later that night, maybe the dad pops in the room and say, hey, I heard you and mom had a good conversation today. Let me know if you have any questions. So it doesn't have to be like a whole rehashing of the conversation, but just more of like a looping in. So it's like, we are all on the same page here. Or like, dads, you don't have to go back and have a in-depth conversation with your daughter about periods. But maybe you could acknowledge, or like, hey, I know there's a lot going on. I know you probably don't want to talk to me about this, but just know I'm here for you and I love you. Just acknowledgement that like, they're talking to you, we're talking to me, I'm here for you. So I don't ever want to think that, well, dads, you got to start talking to your daughters and your sons and mom, So there's going to be different leans, I think. Yeah. But I think it's important to have the acknowledgement of like, hey, I heard about this. I am here for you. I love you. If you ever have questions for me, let me know. Mom's in the car all the time, so she's getting so many good questions. But just so you know, I'm here too. Yeah. So there's not going to be a perfect pattern for every family. But if there's 2 parents in the home, I think it's important to acknowledge.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, and it is important. I mean, that it's not just, that's mom's deal.
Yeah,
or dad will take care of that when he comes home. It really is both. I think that affirms so much.
Exactly.
I wanted to add one thing when you were talking about is it too late? I think that's a great time to also kind of introduce this idea, and we kind of talk about this with beauty, boundaries, and brokenness, but introduce this idea to our kids, no matter how old they are, that you are going to hear things about sex that are confusing and degrading or silly, and I will tell you the truth. And kind of, even if they're 14, you're going to hear words that are really degrading, or, slang words, or you're going to see things or hear things. And so that can all be really confusing. And so I want to make sure you hear my voice too. And so I think what that also does is kind of affirms your authority in a way. So when they do hear kids talking at school, what does that word mean? Or why are they talking? Why is that silly? Or what does this mean? Or, oh, I just saw that picture, or things like that. It's like, that's what my mom was telling me about. Or that's what my dad told me kids are going to be silly about this kind of stuff, or kids have incorrect information. You kind of just want to go ahead of them, kind of preempt these situations to kind of prepare them a little bit of like, hey, you're in middle school, and pretty much anything that has to do with sex, your friends are going to think is really funny. But that doesn't mean they know what they're talking about. So I want you to hear my voice too, because you're going to hear a lot of confusing things. So I want you to be hearing my voice because I know a lot more than your friends. And kind of establishing that authority and kind of preempting some of those things they'll hear.
And also on stumbling onto pornography. It's kind of the same thing. We anticipate that is something that will probably happen. And so just like Megan has a great illustration, just like you prepare your child for their first trip to the dentist. Okay, you're going to come into the dentist office. They're going to put you in kind of a big chair. The doctor's going to be wearing a mask. There's going to be a bright light. You're going to open your mouth. This is what's going to happen. And you get there, and well, sure enough, this is exactly. And so I'm not afraid. And mom knew or dad knew what was going to happen. So to prepare kids to say, as we do, like an iPad is a great thing. We can watch some great things, but there are also some scary things there. And so I want you to know that if you ever see a bad picture, you're not a bad person, but you need to come tell me. We need to see what we can do about that not happening again, or we need to talk about it. Because if they encounter that and they haven't had that forewarning from their parent, then they don't know what to do with that information. It becomes a secret, and then that's when the darkness starts to take over. So we just feel very strongly that parents need to have, sooner than they think, conversations with their kids about that.
Yeah,
and with that, it's like I'm sorry.
You guys say that sooner than you think. I think it's really important because it is. It has to be. And again, there's a beauty to this that you're protecting them from something that's really dark, but you can't wait. Sooner is better. Well,
I was just saying, some parents think, well, I don't want to talk to my 3-year-old about pornography. And you don't have to in those terms, but just in the same way that a 3-year-old knows in the kitchen, hey, be careful, that stove's really hot. They're aware of the dangers in their daily life.
Yeah.
And I think we can do that with internet safety and digital images. That's part of our children's daily lives. And if it isn't, please call me and tell me how you're doing that.
Yeah.
But it is, at least in my home.
But the tone can be the same as the
tone
oven.
can be the same. Like, hey, you know what? You were being so patient waiting for your brother's doctor's appointment. You can play a game on mommy's phone, but I'm putting in the password because remember, there are some good things on this phone, but there also might be some bad things. So it's my job to protect what your little eyes see. So here just to give them this idea. There are some good things, but some bad things.
And we're going to have a whole episode on that too, on technology and even specifically to pornography and how you protect and what to do if it becomes a reality, even to a point of addiction and things like that. One final question, and I really would like to probably have you guys back on at some point, part 2 of this. The dynamic of a person who's afraid my child might ask me about my past. And my past is not a past that brought God glory. Maybe I was a Christian, but just wasn't obedient, or maybe I wasn't even yet. I'm afraid to tell them. Should I tell them? At what point do I tell them, or do I never tell them? So what would you say? What would your counsel be there?
Well, first of all, I would say your younger children are not going to ask that. That is one of the dangers of waiting till they're a teenager because
they connect dots.
Exactly. But when they're young, that's not on their mind. So you can get a lot of good information in there before. And then as a result of that, you can say, there's a reason I've been talking to you for a long time because I didn't have the vision that I have now.
That's great.
Good
language.
Of what this was intended to be. Or I heard it, I didn't believe it. And I'm not going to go into details. I don't think you have to go into details. But I will just say I learned a lot of lessons that led me to believe what I want you to know is better than what I understood.
Yeah.
I think you can generally, they'll hear your heart. Basically, you want them to hear your heart, not the details.
Yeah.
So I think entering into a conversation that is hard on you, your kids pick up on that. and you don't have to get into the details, I don't believe.
And I think actually that statement follows through everything. It's like you want your child to hear your heart. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the details are going to be safe and appropriate, but other times not. But even why we're having this conversation is we want our children to hear our heart. Actually, even more, we want them to hear God's heart.
Exactly.
God's heart for the design that he made, which I think is really beautiful.
Mm-hmm. And I think too with that's a conversation that can be really impactful for the late teens years. But that's not a conversation a third grader is going to ask.
No.
No.
Nor
if they
would
do,
it be appropriate.
If the third grader asks, I think it's okay to say, can you say lie on a church podcast? I don't know. But punt that answer till later, because it could be a really fruitful conversation as they're much older. Mm-hmm. But to your point, that's not necessarily a conversation a young kid will ask. But sometimes little kids will start asking, well, do you and Dad do that?
Yes.
Where do you do that? When do you do that? Have you done that? And there's a balance of secrets and privacy. Yeah. And we kind of have those categories with some of these conversations. Mm-hmm. Of like, this is not a secret topic, but it's a private topic. So some of these questions I'm not going to answer.
Yeah. Or I actually use humor as the kids get older. And I do make things up at that point, and they, Dad, whoa, so.
Humor is always good for this topic.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless you're not funny.
Yeah. Well, then yes.
And then don't go there.
One of the things
don't start here then.
One of the things I've appreciated today is just how you really want to give people a clear vision with clear language, making them comfort to face the fears that they're facing. So tell us quickly, how can people find out or get access to the resources that you guys have?
Well, we have an Instagram account, and we have a course that people can take. But I'm going to let Megan tell you all about that, because she says it's so much better. For more birds and bees. Yes.
For more birds and bees.
If you want more birds and bees, you can find us at birds-bees.com. You can follow us on Instagram at birds_bees. And those are the two main avenues. We have a podcast. There's like 6 episodes because we realize they take a long time. But they're really good episodes. So if you want to hear more about periods or children touching themselves, or what are some other hot topics?
Some of the fears.
Fears. Anyways, lots of good conversations. And the course has everything. That's kind of the main thing. So find us online and follow us on Instagram. We share lots of talking tips.
Okay. And we'll try to have that listed on the screen so people can see that. Right. But if they're listening to it, they can't see it. So say it one more time.
Okay, sorry. birds-bees.com.
Okay.
Or on Instagram at birds_bees.
Okay. I'm really grateful for both of you. And I wish we had been exposed to this a little bit earlier with our older 3 children. But, we did the best we could.
I think they turned out
and
okay.
They're doing okay.
God is bigger than this.
They're doing okay. But it does matter. It really does. And I'm really grateful for what you're doing. So appreciate y'all. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching and listening. Again, if you have any questions or would like to talk about anything, you can email us at deeplight@pcpc.org. Is that right? I'm talking to our producer. So deeplight@pcpc.org. We are very, very thankful for you giving us this time. I hope you have a great day. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Deep Light podcast from Park Cities Presbyterian Church. We would love for you to be our guest this Sunday morning as we gather together for worship at 8, 9:30, or 11 a.m. We are located in the Uptown Dallas area at the corner of Oaklawn Avenue and Wycliffe Avenue. To find out more, please visit pcpc.org.